Found Duckling by EvaDragon, Chapter 15, The Summoning. Summary. Phantom gets summoned. Superman and Phantom have a heart-to-heart discussion. Red Robin realizes how shit his brother's life actually was. Phantom? Superman called uncertainly as he flew into the summoning site. Phantom's trackers, comms, and panic button had all been knocked offline by the magic of the summoning for some reason. But Phantom had given a shout, as he'd been trained to do, before he went silent. "Soups? Help," came the weak reply. Superman quickly activated his X-ray vision so that he could see what exactly he was dealing with. Cultists. Of course it's cultists. Superman heaved a sigh. He sent a signal back to the bats and to the Watchtower to alert them of their location. They were somewhere in northern Canada, he thought. He hoped that summoning Phantom was the only magic that the cultists had on hand, otherwise things were going to get messy and fast, since the Kryptonian and magic didn't exactly get along. "I'm coming, Phantom. Help is on the way," Superman responded, and then he swept into action. He rushed into the fray using his cold breath to freeze the cultists to the ground. He didn't hold back to knock some of them unconscious. He even used his laser eyes once or twice. He really wished he could have killed those dang cultists for how weak and broken Phantom looked. And yes, he said dang, because Superman would never cuss. Ma Kent would have his hide if she ever found out that he used cuss words, thank you very much. By the time help had arrived, Superman had most of the cultists under control. Wonder Woman, Batman, and Nightwing swept in and quickly found the stragglers. Superman had crossed over to the summoning circle. It was lined with the petals and buds of a strange-looking flower. They looked like rosebuds, with a purple-trimmed black stem and leaves. Some of the buds and petals were burning and were releasing a red vapor into the air. Superman gently flew, being careful not to disturb the arrangement. Over to Phantom, who curled into a fetal position, looking like he was in agony. "Phantom, what can I do for you?" he asked as he placed a hand on the ghost's shoulder. "Flowers, poisonous," the ghost rasped out. Batman and Nightwing raced over while Superman blanched. "Bats, we've got to get him to the Watchtower. He says the flowers are poisonous," Superman reported as Nightwing fussed over his brother. "Go," Batman grunted out. Superman nodded and then gently cradled the Haifa into his arms. "Hang on, Phantom. I'm going directly to the Watchtower," Superman informed the Haifa, who was hanging limply in his arms. Phantom managed to nod before he lost his battle with consciousness. Superman blinked as a bright light surrounded the half-ghost in his arms. Suddenly, Superman was no longer holding a cold, white-haired being with no heartbeat who weighed very little. He was now holding a warm, black-haired teenager, one he very distinctly remembered interviewing a few weeks ago. Danny groaned weakly in his arms, which spurred Superman to fly faster. "Watchtower, I'm coming in hot. Ready the medbay," Superman called out over his comms. He heard a flurry of movement as he approached the space base. The hangar door was open and he rushed through to medbay. Flash and Martian Manhunter and a team of the Watchtower's medical professionals were waiting for him as he appeared at the entrance. He carefully laid Danny down on the bed that had been provided for him. Superman stepped back as the medical team swooped in and began hooking Danny up to various monitors. Danny groaned, a pitiful sound, and then the medical team were scrambling to put a sick bucket underneath his face as he started spasming and vomiting. He threw up blood and something else. It was green flecked, and Superman swore it almost otherworldly. "Superman," he heard in his comm unit, Nightwing's voice. "Yes," he answered. "Oracle will be patching through Phantom's medical file so you can get it to the medical team. Red Robin should be arriving on station shortly. Batman and I will meet you there." Nightwing explained. Superman repeated this information to the waiting medical team. One of the computers in the room beeped, and the chief medical officer rushed over and began reading Danny's medical file. The doctor barked out new orders to stabilize Danny. It seemed to help as Danny was no longer throwing up green-flecked blood and flopped back, another pained moan escaping his lips. The door to the room whooshed open, and there stood a frantic Red Robin who looked like he had barely put his uniform on before rushing to the station. It was very off-putting seeing the normally very put-together teenager so very thoroughly rumpled. Red Robin rushed over to Danny's side and grabbed his hand. "Hey, Danny, I'm here," he said softly while curling his fingers through the younger boy's hair. Danny attempted to open his eyes and focus them. "Red?" he slurred. His eyes closed again, and he whined, a high-pitched, keening noise. Red Robin shook Danny's shoulder, and Danny opened his eyes again. "Hey, I need you to tell me what we need to do for you," Red Robin whispered into his brother's ears. "Ectoplasm," Danny managed to get out before he started dry heaving again. Then he lost his battle of consciousness once again. Superman and Red Robin were determined to remain at Danny's side, if only so that they could give themselves comfort. Batman and almost the entirety of the Bat Brigade rushed into the medical wing of the Watchtower a couple of hours later. A few had remained behind to ensure that Gotham had coverage, but even Damian had rushed to the Zeta tubes, anxiously awaiting the moment Batman arrived in the Batplane. Danny had an IV running with neon green fluid being pushed through it. Hood shoved Red Robin to the side so that he could be closer to the boy. Hood looked at the various monitors on the boy before giving a gruff scoff that came out weird due to the modulator in his helmet. Red Robin rolled his eyes at the older vigilante, but otherwise didn't protest being roughly moved out of the way. Once it seemed like Danny had stabilized, most of the Batclan flittered back to Gotham. After all, crime didn't stop just because one of them was badly hurt. Hood, Red Robin, and Superman remained on the Watchtower and would alternate who would be at Danny's side just in case he woke up. Hood made calls to his lieutenants to make sure Crime Alley would be well covered for a few days. Red Robin could work on WE stuff from the space station, and Superboy had agreed to cover Metropolis for Superman. Superman was standing vigil over Danny when Danny groaned. Superman turned to see Danny's ice-blue eyes staring at him. "Hey, Supes," Danny called to the big blue Boy Scout. Superman flew over Danny's bed and quickly checked over the young man's vitals. Realizing that his fever had broken and all of his other vitals were normal, Superman pressed the call button to get the attention of one of the medical team so that they could disconnect him from some of his machines. The chief medical officer and 2 nurses appeared in Danny's room shortly after Superman pressed the call button. They checked Danny's vitals and were happy with what they found. They disconnected most of the machines but left the IV and blood pressure machine connected. Superman and Danny sat in silence for a while before Danny looked up at the Boy Scout. "Ask your questions, Supes, as long as you don't ask how I died," he said weakly. Superman passed him a cup of water and helped Danny hold the straw while he took a few sips. "Your twin sister, she's not really your twin, is she?" Superman asked haltingly. Danny sighed. He pushed the button on the bed so that he could sit up a bit. "Are you sure you want to know? It's not a happy story," he replied with a sad smile. Superman nodded. Danny heaved another sigh and then motioned for Superman to make himself comfortable. "So that part in your article about Vlad going to college with the Fentons was the truth. But it's a bit darker than that. Vlad blamed Jack for the accident that turned him into a Haffa. But the truth is, Maddie was just as much responsible as Jack, but Jack was just easier to blame, if only because Jack's a bit more airheaded. You have to understand, they're both inventors. They're both scientists. But even back in college, Vlad loved Maddie, but Maddie loved Jack. unrequited love and all that. So when the Fenton's proto-portal blew up in Vlad's face, it was easier to blame Jack and Jack alone than to blame both or even to blame Maddie. Danny began his explanation. Okay, but what does this have to do with you and your sister? Superman asked, confused. Everything. Did Batman fill you in on Ghost's obsessions? Superman nodded. Vlad's main obsession was power, but his secondary obsession was Maddie, which translated itself onto me when he found out that I was also a Haffa. If he could get rid of Jack, then Maddie would fall into his arms, and so would her children. Jazz was almost the spitting image of Maddie, except her eyes, but she was a girl. And then there was me. Even though everyone always claimed I looked like Jack, I was still a boy, and a Haffa to boot. Misplaced and antiquated misogyny and all that. But Vlad, he went about it the wrong way. He wanted to control me. He wanted power over me. And when I didn't bow down to him, well, let's just say we basically became something like arch nemesises. Oh, Superman said dumbly. Yeah, didn't help that I was 15, so, teenage rebellion and all that. Jack thought him harmless. Maddie just thought he was a creep. When he realized that I wasn't going to be under his thumb, that's when he got the bright idea to kidnap me, torture me, and the end result was a bunch of clones. Most of them destabilized right in front of my eyes. Danny was the only one who survived. Apparently cloning a half-ghost is extremely difficult, and as is apparently the rule with clones, she tried to kill me. Superman did a sharp intake of breath, but Danny wasn't bothered. Yeah, it was a whole thing. But between me, my actual sister, and my two best friends, we managed to convince her that Vlad was, well, Vlad. Con-El and I, we didn't have the greatest of starts, Superman said with a sad lilt in his voice. Nothing you can do or say to him will ever be as bad as what the Fentons did or said to me, Danny said while he laid a hand on Superman's. What? Right after the portal opened, I listened to the Fentons talk about how they were going to tear Phantom apart molecule by molecule, or how they were going to dissect him if they were ever going to get their hands on him. Superman met Danny's eyes horrified. They built weapons that were meant to destroy ghosts that I would have to go in later and sabotage. You've written the articles, Superman, about the Anti-Ecto Control Acts and the GIW. Superman's eyes grew wide. He remembered when Constantine had first summoned the ghost to the Watchtower and what he'd said about scientists hurting him and about how he'd been held in captivity by the GIW. Danny nodded. So I'll say this again. Whatever you've said or done to your clone will never be as bad as that. How could I make it up to him? The super asked. Danny thought about what he wanted to say before he answered. When Danny realized that Vlad was a Fruit Loop, she traveled a lot last year. It was only recently that she realized that she wanted to settle down and try to have a real life. I'm not saying do the same thing with him, but the first thing that you need to do is realize that he's just as much of a victim in this as you. I'm not invalidating your feelings on this. Trust me, when it happened to me, I was angry and scared and really wanted to punch something. That I can understand, Superman said with a snort. But at the same time, punching Danny wouldn't have solved the problem, wouldn't have made the problem go away, and would have likely made it worse. Also, again, I was 15, and my house wasn't safe for me, so it damn sure wouldn't have been safe for another half-ghost. So I did the only thing I could at the time. I let her go. She wanted to travel anyways. Danny heaved a sigh and looked at the window that opened into his room. What do I do to fix this? Superman repeated his question. For starters, help me bust out of this joint. Danny leaned forward to conspiratorially whisper into Superman's ear. The super looked over at Red Robin, who merely nodded. Superman unhooked the blood pressure machine but kept the IV line intact. He gently scooped up the boy while Red Robin raced over to grab the IV pole. Danny giggled. Superman held him while Red Robin walked next to them, pushing Danny's IV pole. They made their way to the monitor room since technically Superman was on duty. Red Robin had managed to get a domino mask on his brother before they entered the monitor room, and then they entered. Danny was impressed. He was sandwiched between the two heroes who both fussed over him. Danny's eyes flickered over the several screens as he watched the various heroes and vigilantes all over the world do their thing. His core started purring, but it was slightly muted as it was still recovering from the blood blossom poisoning. Danny tensed and then violently stood up, pointing at one screen. Superman and Red Robin looked up at the screen he was looking at to see a giant glowing green plant monster currently wreaking havoc in Star City. The plant monster could rival any of Ivy's any day. Both heroes heard Danny growl. It was a feral thing that struck fear in their hearts. "Fucking undergrowth!" Danny snarled. Red Robin placed a grounding hand on his shoulder. "Danny, stop and think for a minute. You can't. You're still recovering from being fucking poisoned. But you're not alone in this anymore. Tell me how to beat that thing," Red Robin said while cradling Danny's face to his. Danny's eyes flashed a toxic green that made Red Robin suck in a breath before Danny sank back into his chair. "Ice. He's weak to ice. Superman, if you and Superboy use your frost breath, that should weaken him enough, and then Red Robin can suck him in the thermos I made. Red can bring him back to me so I can send him back where he belongs," Danny said tiredly. Superman and Red Robin nodded at each other. Danny watched the screen as both Supers and Red Robin appeared on the appropriate screen. Superman and Superboy used their freezing breath to ice the ghost as much as possible. They would also on occasion swoop in and use their laser eyes or punch the bastard. The battle between the Ancient and the two Supers was as quick as it was rough before Red Robin finally had his chance. The Ancient toppled to the ground and Red Robin unclicked his thermos from his belt and pointed it at the downed ghost. A beam of bluish-white light erupted from the thermos as it sucked in the downed ghost. Red Robin slumped in weary triumph. It had been his second ghost fight, his first without someone who actually knew what they were doing against a ghost. But damn, he'd almost rather fight the fucking Joker than whatever fresh hell this was. And Danny had faced this thing alone? Superboy flew over to Red Robin and asked if he wanted a ride back up to the Watchtower. He mutely assented. He was so done with this day. First, he had lost a lead in a major drug trafficking ring him and Jason had been working on. Then, Danny had been summoned late in the afternoon to bum-fucked northern Canada out in the middle of nowhere. Thank whatever gods were listening that Superman had been able to get to him quickly. Then, come to find out that Danny had been poisoned by those fucking cultists, and now here he was cleaning up after a ghost. Red Robin was exhausted. You could only imagine how his younger brother felt. Superman was already at Danny's side, fussing over the younger boy. During their fight, Danny seemed to have lost whatever strength he'd gained and was close to losing consciousness again. Superman scooped him up in the same bridal carry, while Red Robin was once again pushing the IV pole. The four of them made their way back to Danny's room in the medical wing, and Superman laid him back down on his bed. "Superman, wait," Danny called after the Kryptonian. Superman turned back towards the young man. "What is it?" "I never answered your question from earlier." Superman looked at Danny in confusion before he remembered what he'd asked. "Just remember that he's as much of a victim in this as you are. Think of it more like a secret pregnancy or something. Like what happened with Bruce and Damian. And then maybe start by apologizing for how you started off. And go from there. The last thing to remember is the only person who deserves your anger the one who violated you," Danny said, and then his eyes were closed and he drifted off to sleep. "Red Robin, when did your brother get so wise?" Superman asked the older teen. For the second time in his life, Red Robin answered, "I have no fucking clue." Notes. Phantom. Help! Superman, cultists, why is it always cultists? Phantom, why is it always blood blossoms? Batman and Nightwing, what even is this kid's life? Danny, ask away, Soups. Superman, so clone? Danny, trauma dumps on Superman. Superman, in his head. Thou shalt not kill or cuss. Thou shalt not kill or cuss. Watchtower alert goes off. Danny about goes feral. Red Robin, do you want to die all the way? Fucking idiot. Superman to Red Robin, what in the heck is this thing? Red Robin, according to Phantom, basically a plant ghost god. Superboy, and Phantom beat this thing by himself? Red Robin nods. What the actual fuck? Superman, what he said. Red Robin, you have no idea, and I've only known him for a few months. The shit he said in that time. Danny to Superman, apologize and talk. He's not you. Superman, okay. Superman to Red Robin, how did your brother get so wise? Red Robin, no clue.